thank you for coming for the memorial for Muhammad Mo Slamet. For those of you who don't know him, my name's Waverley. I'm his son-in-law, married to Ginny. And for those of you with a keen ear would have recognised the dulcet tones of Mo singing one of his favourite revolutionary songs, Sepasan Matabola, which doesn't translate into English very well, because I think it literally means something like big football eyes. It's a story. It's his favourite revolutionary song. It's about a revolutionary fighter going off to fight against the Dutch, and on his train journey he sees a beautiful woman with big eyes. So it's one of his favourite songs, and he was singing that there for the last time. In terms of the order of ceremony today, we were going to have prayer led by Imam Edwards, but unfortunately he has some other pressing matters he can't attend today, so we won't have the Muslim prayer today. The order of services, we're going to have a formal eulogy by Dini, and then we're going to have some reflections by his eldest son, Rolly, and Pak Slamet's grandchildren. There's some funny stories in there. And then we're going to have a photo, a tribute in a slideshow while we play another one of Bing Slamet's top hits, which again doesn't translate too well, but I think literally sort of in essence means remembering your sweet face. And then after that we're going to have some lovely refreshments provided by Ibu Pancha, who's been cooking away for the whole last week. So I'm now going to hand over to Dini for the formal eulogy.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Come close or turn the volume up on the mic. Is that okay? Is it? Okay. We'll just wait until some more people are coming in through the door. I'll just start now. Thanks very much everyone for coming. We've got people, quite a few of Dad's old students and colleagues and our friends, my brother's friends and myself, so thank you very much for coming to celebrate my father's life. Just got to take this off. 1922, the year of my father's birth, was marked by two significant events, aside from his birth of course. The creation of the Soviet Union and the beginning of the Irish Civil War. The First World War had ended just 4 years earlier, and the world was still a troubled place. But the world in which my father, Muhammad Slamet, was born into was relatively peaceful and untouched by global turmoil. His birthplace, the small backwater town of Garut in West Java, is located in a gorgeous, fertile valley, ringed by volcanoes. Its emerald green rice fields, tea and coffee plantations, hot springs and cool climate made it a very popular resort for Dutch colonialists of the day. My father was one of the fortunate ones, not because he was born into wealth, but because he was born into a family that was granted opportunities by those Dutch colonialists. Our grandfather, Pak Supada, was a civil servant, the deputy postmaster of the Garut Regency. The postmaster of the Garut Regency was of course a Dutchman, so that was as high as he could attain. As members of the native elite, my father's family lived in relative comfort with a small degree of prosperity, which meant that when our grandmother Aisha, who was pregnant with my father, took medication that made her gravely ill, my grandfather was able to afford the care of a real medical doctor. My father wasn't expected to survive my grandmother's medical mishap, so when he was born into the world, screaming loudly, apparently healthy, and very much alive, Patsupada gave thanks by naming his son after the doctor who saved both mother and baby, Dr. Slamet. The hospital in Garut still bears Dr. Slamet's name, as he was a local hero, a doctor who worked tirelessly against a disease that had been eradicated in the West, but which still existed in Indonesia even into the 20th century. That disease, the bubonic plague, would ultimately claim the life of the doctor who saved both my grandmother's and my father's lives. My father spent his happiest childhood years in Ampenan on the island of Lombok, west of Bali. He once wrote about his idyllic childhood, growing up in a house by the river and playing in the shallows, catching shrimp in the clear water or playing on the beach, trying and failing to catch the crabs that would vanish into their holes. My father revisited his childhood home in 1974. The house still stood, but the river was heavily polluted and its banks covered with rubbish. It was, for him, one of the many heartbreaks that he would experience in middle and old age. My father's fond memories continued into his time at school. As the youngest of two children and an only son, Pa was, let's face it, the prince of his family. His teenage years spent in the central Javanese city of Tegal weren't troubled by mundane things like chores or earning pocket money, but were rather filled with long bike rides with his buddies, athletics, swimming, watching the ships in the harbour, and games of table tennis and kusti, the Indonesian version of cricket. It was during this time, as a junior high school student, that he would meet and fall in love with my mother, Sunari. This peaceful world of theirs would come to an end when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on my father's birthday in 1941 and launched its invasion of the Dutch East Indies. Schools were closed, and with not much to do, my father decided to approach the Japanese occupying authorities for permission to establish a youth association to keep Garut's young people occupied. He also began to teach Indonesian, the new unifying language of the independence movement, to the children of the Regency and to others who had never learned it. These activities are the first evidence of Pa's interest and passion for building community. Unintentionally and unconsciously, Pa had stepped up to be the town's youth leader and became recognised as such by the local politicians. In 1943, colleges and universities reopened, and Mum and Pa parted company for a couple of years as she pursued her studies at a teachers' college in East Java, while Pa went to study medicine in Jakarta. My father's studies were interrupted again by the defeat of the Japanese in 1945 and the return of the Dutch to reclaim their colonial possession. In the intervening years, the push for independence had gained momentum, and Jakarta's medical students were at the forefront of that movement. And so it was that my father became involved in preparing for the proclamation of Indonesia's independence in August 1945, the moment Dad became a revolutionary. The stories of Pa's exploits as a freedom fighter are of dangerous missions and harrowing experiences. But his favourite tales were those of his narrow escapes. Pa and his comrades ran a rebel radio station called Radio Surapati, based in Garut. The radio station would jam the Dutch broadcasts and convey its own news to the region. One day, the building that housed the station was bombed, but the transmitter remained operational. So Pa and his comrades moved the rebel radio to his mum's house, as you do. It wasn't long before the Dutch would catch up with them, and once again the transmitter had to be moved. In the process of burning sensitive documents in the backyard, my father heard the roar of a motorcycle and approaching jeeps. He immediately hid in the undergrowth that overhung my grandmother's fish ponds. As he lay there, he felt a warm stream of liquid showering down on him as the Dutch troops decided that the bank above the fish ponds was a pretty good place to use as a urinal. Luckily, they never inspected the bushes below them too carefully because they would have found an unhappy and very wet and smelly young man. Another anecdote was when my father had to take supplies by boat from Java to Lampung in Sumatra. His sailboat was stopped near Krakatoa by a Dutch patrol boat. The sailors set about searching the boat, but stopped when they got to Pa's suitcase, which contained his clothes and his Dutch and German medical textbooks. The sailors, who were fresh from the Netherlands, were astounded that my father, a native, spoke fluent Dutch and was studying to become a doctor. They were so impressed they failed to search the rest of the boat, which was a good thing because, unknown to Pa, it had also been loaded with a large number of concealed weapons. Because of his medical experience, Pa often found himself helping to carry civilian casualties to the hospital in Garu. This was dangerous work, as the Dutch soldiers were always on the lookout for resistance fighters passing as refugees. On one occasion, Pa was helping to evacuate a young woman who had a serious leg wound. Dressed as a peasant and with his heart beating out of his chest, he approached the roadblock. A voice barked at him. "Jy verstaat Hollands, hè?" Or, "You understand Dutch, don't you?" Pa was so frightened that he responded in Indonesian, "No, sir." The soldier let him pass, completely oblivious that in order for Pa to have answered that way, he would have had to have understood the question. Even 50 years later, when recalling this story, the memory would make him giggle. While these stories are entertaining today, like many of his generation, my father had many other memories of those conflict years that he suppressed. One incident that he reluctantly did speak about involved 10 comrades who were ambushed by the Dutch, then tortured and executed. Were his cousins who had grown up with him in his parents' house. Sorry. By 1948, Pa was a fugitive wanted by the Dutch military. He hid out around West Java. Sorry, but it became... Sorry. But it became very clear that the region was no longer safe for him. A Catholic school principal, for example, had been arrested because he had the misfortune of sharing my father's name. Around this time, he learnt that one of his relatives had received a scholarship to study medicine in Utrecht in the Netherlands, and he thought, what better way to elude the authorities than to hide under their noses in their homeland? But how would he pass the screening process, not only to obtain a scholarship, but to get a passport? Yet another lucky break came when he discovered that one of his old teachers, whom he knew to be a patriot, was a high-level employee of the education department. His former teacher told him not to worry about the paperwork and vetting, that he would look after it, but there were no longer scholarships available to study medicine. Pa, however, could study Indology, a course that prior to the war had been available only for the Dutch who wanted to train as colonial administrators. Only one native had been successful in passing the exam, and that was the man who had become the Sultan of Jogja, Hamengkubuwono IX. Remarkably, Pa would also pass his exam, and he was soon headed for the ship that would take him into the bosom of the enemy. My mother, across the other side of Java, would make an epic journey with her 2 younger siblings in order to say goodbye to my father. That journey across Dutch-held territory and through active war zones has become legendary in our family. Unfortunately, she arrived in Jakarta 1 week after my father's ship had sailed. My mother would marry my father by proxy and join him several months later after she too won a scholarship to study in the Netherlands. While studying at Leiden University, Pa continued his activism for the freedom movement and campaigned about the situation in Indonesia. After being a subjugated people under the Nazis, many of the Dutch no longer had an appetite for colonialism and supported Indonesian independence. So, when independence was finally being negotiated in 1949, Pa, with his fluency in both Dutch and English, was there as one of the translators at the Dutch-Indonesian Roundtable Conference in The Hague. Pa's studies in Holland were prolonged not only by these activities that occupied his attention, but because during this time he was a father to 2 young children, my 2 elder siblings, Barty and Rolly. My father, a passionate photographer who had won prizes for his work in the Netherlands, would name his first son after his favourite camera, the Rolleiflex. Midway through his course, Pa realised that the skills required to administer a colony were no longer relevant nor appealing to him. He switched courses to study anthropology and sociology and gained his Dr. Andes, the equivalent of a master's, in 1958. Pa returned to Indonesia as a budding academic, teaching at the Institute of Education in Bandung, then at the Bandung Institute of Technology. But his world and that of our family would really open up in 1963 when Pa began work with the UN. Pa was appointed a researcher with the UNESCO Research Centre on Social and Economic Development in Southern Asia, based in New Delhi. All of us have wonderful memories of that time in India, a magical land full of wondrous sights. We had the chance to travel around the country in our blue Chevrolet, then the only car of its kind in India. My parents loved the diplomatic life, and as children we loved our UN school and the school friends who came from every corner of the globe. Conflict and politics had a way of catching up with Pa, however, and the political upheaval of 1965 that would see the installation of a military dictatorship and the mass killings of as many as 3 million alleged communists made living in Indonesia perilous for an academic who was a believer in social justice. My father was actually recalled to Indonesia during his posting in India, which would have spelt potential disaster for him. But the ambassador to India at the time, who was distantly related to my mother, refused to let him go, telling the government that Pa was doing important work for UNESCO and couldn't be spared. That act spared his life. But good fortune would smile on my father again in 1967 when he was offered a position with Melbourne University as a lecturer with the Department of Indonesian Studies, teaching anthropology and sociology. Pa's colleague, Dr. Charles Koppel, who's here today, has described him as a pioneer in the teaching of anthropology at the university. When Pa retired in the late 80s as a senior lecturer, the teaching of anthropology was just being introduced into the wider arts faculty, and it was sad for him that he had reached the mandatory age of retirement just as this field was opening up. My father probably wouldn't have cared for teaching in today's universities, where tenured academics are subjected to constant demands to publish. Pa didn't publish very much because he channeled all his energies into his love for teaching. And because he loved teaching his students loved learning from him. Pa was an intellectual who had an exceptional grasp of the disciplines he studied and taught. His kindness, wacky sense of humour, and great joy in imparting his knowledge endeared him to his students. Never afraid to shock and entertain during his tutorials, Pa once came to class wearing a sarong and proceeded to demonstrate its various uses. This was how you would use one as a blanket, how you could use one as a means of carrying things, how you could wear one while bathing in the river, and finally, how you could guard your modesty while going to the toilet in a field. This came with a full squatting demonstration on the table that left his students in stitches. I know my father had a formative influence on several generations of diplomats, business people, lawyers and friends in Indonesia who studied under him. Two of those students became family. Catherine Hill, who married Rolly and whose children Ali and Sharif are here, and Annette, her sister, who has also been like a sister to us. Both are overseas and send their regrets. Annette recalls that every time Pa would see the two of them, he'd say, "Ah, the Bukit sisters." For those of you who don't speak Indonesian, Bukit means hill. And he would laugh heartily at his own joke every time. Another former student, Bruce Wallace, who served as an Australian diplomat for decades, sent this message from abroad when he heard the news of my father's death. "I was so very fond of your father, and I just worked out how long I have known him. 45 years. That's approaching 2/3 of my life and almost half of his. He was a great teacher, possessed of a fantastic intellect, and was always approachable, witty and amusing. It was also great to have him as a friend as well. I can never forget him and obviously cannot ever underestimate the positive and encouraging influence he had on my life and my fascination with Indonesia." While my father helped shape the minds of his many students, it is the way he has touched the hearts of others over the years that will be his great legacy. Pa once wrote that it was his mother who instilled in him a burning sense of social justice and humanitarianism. What this meant in everyday terms was his willingness to build community and simply to help and offer advice. In the late 60s and into the 70s, the only Indonesians who lived in Victoria worked either for the universities or for Radio Australia. My parents' home became the centre of that small but growing community. The end of Ramadan celebrations were held there, as were birthdays, weddings, dance rehearsals, and the ceremonies related to the arrival of new babies. Mum and Dad acted as proxy parents for as many as 10 Indonesian couples who married in Australia. By the way, one of those babies is now here. As Pa's friend and colleague Hendy Hendrata said, there wasn't an Indonesian in Victoria who didn't know Pa and he was Slamet. Day and night, it was open house where people could drop in without calling beforehand, where you could be certain of an open and warm welcome, and where Ibu Slamet would always have a delicious meal ready. Many of my parents' friends will recall that Pa had a really ugly red car, a Mitsubishi Nimbus. There was nothing stylish or pretty about this car, but the only reason Dad bought it was so he could use it to give lifts to people who didn't have transport to or from the many meetings and parties that my parents were invited to. And the gatherings just seemed to grow in number as Mum and Dad became involved in more activities. These included being the driving force behind the establishment of the Indonesian Community Radio program on 3ZZZ. My parents' love of the Indonesian folk music called Keroncong led them to establish the singing group Pusaka Nusantara with the talented Jakasuwano family. We, as his children, just saw it as an excuse for Pa to show off and to sing his favourite song, Sepasang Mata Bola, which you heard at the start of these proceedings. My parents were also active with Ikawiria, the Indonesian Community Association Victoria. But while Mum was elected twice president, Pa was just content to work quietly in the background, which he did with all the activities he was involved in. The evidence of Pa's love of photography is contained in the tens of thousands of photographs that are stored in various garages and sheds around Melbourne. While there are certainly a lot of family photographs, most of them are of his friends, taken at gatherings over the years. They are a testament to my father's love for and loyalty to all these friends. Of course, all of us who knew him will remember his sense of humour. which was often rude, and that funny laugh. Catherine Hill remembers my father's great fondness for the nudge, nudge, wink, wink humour of Benny Hill and the British carry-on comedies. And we were sometimes made to suffer for it. Mum and Dad once took myself, Catherine, and a friend, Ariane, to the drive-in to see a movie. But we suspect that the real reason they wanted to go was because there was a bonus carry-on movie after the main feature. Despite our protests, Mum and Dad decided to stay, and we were imprisoned in the back, groaning, while they sat in the front giggling like children. Sometimes, though, his sense of humour was just plain weird. When I brought my then boyfriend, now my husband Ivor, home to meet the parents for Sunday lunch, everything was going well. Dad was friendly and polite, right up until we were leaving. Because as we backed down the driveway, my father appeared, now dressed in pyjamas and a brown raincoat, and jumped on the bonnet of my mother's car and proceeded to do a crazy ape imitation while he waved us off. Although he lived most of his life outside of Indonesia, Pa never stopped being a patriot and an Indonesian nationalist. He had, after all, fought and spilt blood for that country's freedom. But his friends will tell you that his brand of nationalism wasn't the ugly, jingoistic kind that you would associate with the word nationalism today. It was calm, confident, clear-eyed, and critical. When someone said to him, Indonesia, my country, right or wrong, he replied, no, right is right and wrong is wrong. When the Suharto military regime was finally toppled in 1998, my parents just happened to be in Indonesia. I remember a jubilant phone call from them, with Mum saying, we saw off the Japanese, we saw off the Dutch, and we're now here to see off Suharto. But the riots targeting Indonesians of Chinese descent that followed Suharto's ousting made my parents furious. On their return to Australia, they used their radio program and community newsletters to denounce racial intolerance and to express their deep hurt and disappointment. They saw the behaviour of the mobs and the hatred as a real betrayal of the principles they had fought for. They were equally dismayed by the religious intolerance that has also plagued Indonesia's recent history. Our father was an idealist. He was saddened by the fact that Indonesia never actually fulfilled the promise he had dreamed of. He was dismayed that real social justice and economic equality in Indonesia remain elusive. In his family life, our father was in many ways a man of his era. He could be patriarchal, but wanted his daughters and granddaughters to dream big and believe they could achieve those dreams. He could be authoritarian, but was willing to have his mind changed with logical and well-reasoned arguments. He was also tenacious and stubborn, and this was evident in his final years. My father was devastated by the loss of my mother in 2006. But at the age of 88 and in mourning, he was still well enough to travel to Indonesia on his own. Things, however, began to go wrong soon after. He fractured his spine, tripping over a low table in the middle of the night. We were told that he probably wouldn't walk again, which made living at home impossible. But within 8 months, he was walking again with the aid of a walker and going to Pilates every week. At the age of 89, he was the oldest Pilates patient at the Edith Vale Physiotherapy Clinic. He then had a heart attack, which was resolved with a stent. A stroke followed, which led to vascular dementia. Then a couple of bouts of pneumonia. Then the stroke that would finally rob him of his speech. And finally, an attack of shingles. This all happened over 6 years, and each time he had a health crisis, we were told to prepare ourselves for the worst and to make arrangements. But each time, until this last time, Pa would surprise us by making a good recovery. It became a bit of a joke with the doctor and the nursing staff, and I took to calling him the rubber grandpa because he just kept bouncing back. But death is inevitable, and when it happened, our father, the overachiever, even managed to do that well by simply slipping away in his sleep. We are all grateful for that, and grateful for his life that was so well lived. Thank you.
Look, I only knew Dad well from when I was 10, after my elder sister Barty and I finally joined my dad, Mum, my younger siblings, Archie and Dini, in India. Before that, upon return to Indonesia from the Netherlands, Barty, my brother, Archie and I mostly lived with our grandmothers or other relatives and families, as Dad and Mum had to be resourceful to make ends meet, to feed, clothes, and school us during Indonesia's hard economic times of the late 50s and 60s and early 60s. The other reason why Dad didn't have much time for the three of us was that I believe was his underground activities to realize his dream of a just and prosperous Indonesia, or in our lingo, Indonesia yang adil dan makmur. Sorry, I'm shaking. I recall some of the late night meetings at the house. No wonder the government could curtail his salary. And top this up, we also had another addition to the family, my little sister Dini, who is now the patriarch of our family.
Thank you.
India was a happy times for me, and as Dini said, also for the whole of our family. Dad was always interested in the historical places and monuments of India, and we would at least visit and have a picnic lunch at one of the sites every weekend. I lost count of the many times we visited the Taj Mahal and other monuments of past Indian dynasties. If Mum and Dad were not entertaining, we all would be entertained by other families. And as a 10 to 11-year-old boy, I saw Dad and Mum as a strong, formidable couple. I can still see him dressed in a handsome tuxedo and Mum in her beautiful, colorful kain kebaya, going to many of the diplomatic receptions. And in overhearing the conversation of the adults that our visit are invited to the receptions, Dad and Mum were a popular couple and often the top of the diplomatic set in India. Mum and Dad would often have friends and their family to come to our house and on Friday nights for sumptuous dinner that Mum made. And later towards the night, it involves into ballroom and dancing sessions. Dad was an excellent dancer, from the waltz, quickstep, and jive. He loved his music, and for those of you who knows him, yes, he was always the love of the party. I adored my dad, following him everywhere, assisting him any way I can when he washes the car, fixing, modifying appliances or furniture to make our living environment better. From this, he come to trust me. He rewards me with pocket money for washing and waxing the family car every morning according to his strict idiosyncratic ways. I hide the wood from the top to the bottom and with a particular stroke. Wax on? Wax on. Really? I think that Dad must have passed onto the idea to Mr. Miyagi and the producer of Karate Kid. Wax on? Wax on. Firstly, I used to wash the car in the garage, which I found the practice to be too restrictive. Later on, with the help of our houseboy, I took the courage of pushing the car out of the garage and washing it in the driveway. At first, I thought Dad would be mad to see the car out of the garage and in the driveway, but he never said a thing. He just jumped into the car and to work, and off to work he went. I'm a visual learner and eagerly watches my dad operate and control the car. Then one day, instead of pushing the car out of the garage for the wash, I decided to reverse the car by myself. No, nothing happened actually. The same thing happened as before. He didn't say a word. He simply jumped in the car and off to work he went. I felt very guilty that evening. When he returned from work, I confessed. And he just said, "Did you?" And nothing more than that. Phew, that was close. The following weekend, Dad asked me to come with me for a drive. When we got to a quiet spot, he told me to swap seats and told me to drive. I was barely 11 then. No power brakes, no power steering, and heavy mechanical clutch. From then on, the reward from Dad was for washing the car was not only a generous of money, but allowing me to drive my eldest sister to school every morning. It was such a great feeling. Me in the driver seat, my sister Barbie beside me, and our houseboy at the back to assist with the translation. In case the New Delhi policeman on a push bike would give chase to a kid driving a V8 shuffle in the back end. In 1966, Dad's posting with UNESCO in India. And Dad was offered 2 UN postings. I'll just add up a bit of the plans there. One in Rome, in Italy, working with FAO, and the other one in Lagos, Nigeria, during the Biafran War. The other choice for Dad and the family was, of course, Melbourne. And you can see that the choice was easy, and the rest is history. The day my sister and I landed in Australia to join the rest of the family was the beginning of a new era for me. Today we celebrate the ending of that era. I'd like to finish this tribute to Dad with a quote from the great Mahatma Gandhi, which sums up my relationship with Dad. And it goes like this. I believe in trusting. Trust begets trust. Suspicion is foul and only stinks. He who trusts has never yet lost in the world. And enough quote. Rest in peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Rolly. I'm now going to call up the grandchildren for their recollections. So, Sharif.
Hi everyone, I'm Sharif. I'm Rolly's son, and I just want to share a couple of anecdotes with you about Avi and the lasting impression that we all have of him, I think. It's close to the mic, sorry. So it wasn't until he passed away and he'd been buried that I began to realise how many more sides and how many more stories there were to my puppy. After he was buried, I was told stories about his life by Dad and my Aunt Dinny, about how he fought in the Indonesian resistance against the Dutch, and despite the horrific violence and danger of his life that he experienced both during the Japanese occupation and his struggle against Dutch colonialism, these dark experiences of violence, danger and suffering seemed to have no serious impact on his joviality and sense of humour, and a significant amount of both anecdotal and photographic evidence will attest to this, as you've already heard and you'll see in a moment with the slideshow. But when I remember my grandfather, it's his tremendous sense of humour that will always come to mind. He was the man whose default response to most situations, good or bad, was to chuckle. And this included when my young sister Alia, probably all about 4 years old, got lost at the Kilda Festival, and he was the one to find her completely beside herself, and just started laughing at her, which I'm sure may have scarred her. I think the only real exception to this rule was the time when Alia and I found a large bag full of polystyrene beanbag fillers with little circles and decided to have a snowstorm on the back veranda of their house in Doncaster. Apparently that wasn't entertaining. But he loved his grandkids and he loved regaling us with funny anecdotes about each of us with the others. Perhaps his favourite and most oft-repeated anecdote seemed to be about the time when, and I need to apologise to Kenny for this, when he and young Kenny were eating lunch at the Westfield food court in Doncaster, when Kenny, who was probably all about 3 years old at the time, suddenly and loudly proclaimed to Puppy and all the other diners, "Big poo coming!" You must have heard that story a million times, but it always got a laugh, every single time. But reflecting on my memories of Puppy, for all of his sense of humour and large heart, and as much as he loved us, his grandkids, I don't think he really understood kids. This is perhaps best exemplified by some of the well-meaning but ultimately off-the-mark birthday and Christmas gifts that I received from him as a child. From the wooden letter opener I was given as an 8-year-old, or the 12-month subscription to his beloved Reader's Digest magazine that I received on my 10th birthday. But today I'd like to elaborate on just one significant example of Puppy's unorthodox gift-giving that I feel encapsulates the man's spirit, essence and values. But please bear with me while I provide a little context. As a young child, I was famously obsessed with trains, a fact about which anyone who knew me in the slightest would be blatantly aware. When it came to gift-giving time, just give me something train-related and you were golden. Had a complete stranger, on the other hand, with no knowledge of me personally, been tasked with buying me a gift, one would assume they would go for a high probability easy pleaser, such as maybe some Lego, a toy car, action figure, a Disney or Looney Tunes video, things that I would have been more than happy with, and which would have had a good chance of scoring points with just about any young boy of that age. So around comes my 6th birthday, and enter Puppy, holding a slim, squarish, gift-wrapped package, about the dimensions of a pizza box, if not a few centimetres deeper. Quite a large box, enough to significantly raise the excitement of an already fired-up birthday boy. What could it be? Extra tracks for my train set, a board game, Lego. My mind boggled with possibilities as I rudely bypassed the birthday card and unceremoniously tore through the wrapping paper. Only to have my intrigue and excitement abruptly replaced with surprise at the sight of a gift that only Puppy would have considered fitting for a 6-year-old boy. And, to his credit, it was probably the last thing I would have guessed that I would receive. So points to him there. An analogue wall clock. And not one of those themed, decorated wall clocks for kids with stuff like, I don't know, Thomas the Tank Engine or Disney characters or anything like that festooned across its face and frame. Just a plain, white-faced, analogue clock in a gold plastic frame. I'm not sure whether he was confused and thought I was having a housewarming. But luckily for Puppy, I was a pretty grateful kid who didn't know how to be anything but excited about anything I was given if you told me it was a present. He could have given me a ring of printer paper wrapped in a bow, and I would have been really over the moon. In fact, I think that may have actually happened on a different occasion now that I think about it. So I couldn't wait to chuck in the battery and fire it up. And I fondly recall many an evening spent with that clock in my lap, studying its motions, discovering with delight that if you looked close enough, you could actually see the minute and hour hands moving almost imperceptibly as the second hand ticked. Fun times. I was a weird kid. But that clock from Puppy that seemed in hindsight such a poor choice of gift for a 6-year-old boy gave me an awareness of time as a measurable attribute. With that clock, I learned that 1 minute was 60 ticks. I learned that 5 minutes was time for the long hand to travel from one number on the clock face to the next. I I learned how to read the time from o'clock to half past to quarter past and quarter to, and then a never finer detail. That clock was a gift that gave me more than probably anything else I possibly could have received that birthday, surpassing the transient and finite value of any of the other material objects I'd been given. The real gift of that clock was the invaluable gift of knowledge and understanding. And whether or not this was Puppy's conscious and deliberate intent when he bought that clock, as far as presents go, that gift was Puppy to a T. Practical, long-lasting, and possessing meaning and value beyond the sum of its parts. And I think that everyone who knew Puppy, and whose lives he touched, would agree that the impact of his deeds, just like that clock, was and is deep, lasting, invaluable, and extend far across time. So for all the gifts, both material and immaterial, that you gave to me, and so many others over the course of your long and incredible life, terima kasih, Pups, from all of us.
My name is Rahana and I am Dini and Ida's daughter. In his late 80s, after Ayan passed away, Puppy moved into Granny Flat at the back of our house at 24 Mill Street. As I was at uni at the time, and since Puppy was a regular social butterfly with a schedule full of outings and visits with friends, we were often like two ships passing in the night, crossing paths at the threshold, me on my way out and him on his way in, or vice versa. And without fail, every time we would meet like this, Puppy would send me off with his customary greeting. Success! As many people in this room today will attest, no matter who you were, child, grandchild, student, friend or stranger, Puppy would always find a way to help you find success, whether it was through his seemingly unending capacity for kindness, his passionate mentorship, his generosity and hospitality, or one of the many other exceptional qualities that have been spoken about today. I was lucky enough to experience his contagious enthusiasm for learning new things, something that shaped me throughout my childhood and adolescence, and which still shapes me today. At Ayan and Puppy's house in Doncaster, no books were off limits, as provided they were put away, of course. I was mostly interested in the complete set of the World Book Encyclopedia that took pride of place in the spare room though, and it was Puppy who taught me how to use encyclopedias. A totally obsolete skill today, but one that kept me occupied and out of Ayan and Puppy's hair for the weekend. Incidentally, that's also how I learned about Hannibal, the Carthaginian general who marched war elephants across the Alps in the Second Punic War, and who was the origin of Puppy's nickname for me, Hannibal. Everyone else, by the way, called me Hannibal. Many of Puppy's nearest and dearest will recall, with amusement or residual frustration, his love affair with Reader's Digest and other subscription services. And Sharif and I didn't collaborate on that came up completely independently. And the excitement of the World Book Encyclopedia was soon supplemented with the Wildlife Fact File, a ring binder of collectible fact sheets with colour photography and in-depth information about animals from all over the world. It seemed like every time we went to visit at Doncaster, there would be a new set of fact file sheets waiting for me to pore over with Ayan and Puppy. When, as a teenager, I went through an intense phase of being interested in law, criminal justice and forensic science, I would invariably receive a phone call from Puppy at 7:30 on Thursday. Hannibal, the German dog show is on. The German dog show being Inspector Rex, the Austrian police procedural, featuring a crime-solving German shepherd. After I finished school, Puppy would continue to share his knowledge, giving me newspaper clippings that he thought I would be interested in, and gifting esoteric textbooks such as Ethnic Roots of Insular Southeast Asia and Symbolic Anthropology in the Netherlands, the latter of which still has the University of Melbourne Library slip from 1982, so hopefully they'll forgive the fines. Looking back now, I realise that Puppy's own love of learning and inquiry and his enduring curiosity has been with me and all of us our whole lives. My endless childhood questions never seemed to annoy him, and my adult achievements brought him joy. I'm so grateful to have been included in his passion for enlightenment, education and self-improvement. I believe now that this is one of the many ways that Puppy felt he could help me and all of his grandchildren find success. After this memorial comes to a close, and as you return to your daily routine, should you ever encounter difficulties or feel defeated or frustrated, I'd like to recommend a little something that I do when I need some encouragement. Picture Puppy with a signature goofy grin, with both thumbs up, saying, "Success!" It always works for me. Thank you.
We're now going to have a short photo tribute with Dean Slamet.
Bye.
for coming and sharing our memories today. We have some refreshments served at the table in the back, and we have tea and coffee being served in there as well. So please stay around and share your memories. And thank you to Ibu Pancha for preparing some lovely Indonesian treats here today. Thank you.